Well, then I think the 15 seconds are over.
Indeed. Time to start.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the CBOR Working Group at IETF 121 Dublin. I'm Christian. This is Barry with me. We are chairing this working group, and we'll accompany you through this evening. Please note well the note well. You are all familiar with it because you ticked it off when you registered, but please still have a look. This is about IPR. This is about code of conduct. If there's trouble, you'll know whom to contact, especially if it's us, because otherwise talk to us. We are using this. We are doing this meeting with MeetEcho. So everyone in the room, please sign in with the QR code that you see in the room, so that we can properly keep attendance and assign the blue sheets. Keep your microphones off, and both those of you here and remote participants, please use the queue management tool to get into the queue, so that we know who is speaking and can manage things well. Our agenda for today starts with me doing what I'm currently doing. I'm going through introductions and an agenda, and after that, I'll go through a few documents that kind of just giving a status update on where we are. I'll then very briefly talk about what was done during the hackathon. We continue with a presentation on EDN literals and status update from Carsten, with possibly some discussion on whether the issues that we found in IETF 120 were resolved. Continuing with CDE, Lawrence will be talking a bit, giving comments there. Going back to Carsten with CDDL modules, and then Martin will talk about applications in DNS. Carsten?
Yeah, I was going to propose to get rid of the CDL modules item, because I have a lot more to say if I have an hour, but if I do this in 10 minutes, it's exactly the same time as at IETF 120. So let's not do that right now.
Fine with me.
Do that in an interim at some point. And then we have a little bit more space for the other things.
Sounds good to me. Any other proposed changes, Alexei? Sorry.
So it is not a proposed change, but a question. This morning, Karsten mentioned something about the Young to CBOR discussions. Is this happening here or on a different? Or maybe I didn't understand.
We didn't have it planned on the agenda to talk about Young to CBOR discussions.
Okay. I mean, I have nothing to say there. Just it seems that it will be.
Yeah, basically the drafts are out there. Please comment on the drafts. And we didn't manage to update them for this meeting, but that's of course very much on the agendas, but it's not on the agenda of this meeting. Pointers are on the slides of the core working group.
Okay. With that updated agenda, my next point is to go through a few documents, and we actually did publish something since the last meeting. Thanks, Carsten, Ben, and Hank, and all the reviewers. RFC 9581 on CBOR, basically that enables using CBOR with way more things that are related to time, is now published. Thanks a lot. We are a few, probably days away from having a similar announcement on the updates on the CDDL grammar. That is in auth 48, basically awaiting the last final confirmations. I did have a backup slide just in case this would have gone through, but it's close. Other documents are already on the way there, so more control has been submitted to the IESG and is basically on its path, but that has been quite recent. EDN literals has been there already, but is still subject to discussion. So that discussion part of that discussion we will have today. Packed CBOR is in the state where there is a draft version that we regard as an implementation draft, where we invite people to implement it. Kind of once we do have more implementation experience, that can enter a done state. But please all try it out, and I'll talk briefly from the hackathon experience. CBOR, CDE, and CDDL modules are on the agenda. I won't be saying, okay, modules are not anymore, but that is work in progress. There have been issues. I understand those issues are now under control, so that can progress. And EREF is basically building on EDN literals, focuses on EDN literals now. EREF is still a working group document that can progress based on that. So I won't be changing, because this is a chair head off report. I won't be changing to another slide set. I worked on packed CBOR during the hackathon. Implementing that, at least for decompressor, was really not a big thing. The draft seems to be in a very good shape to enable implementations. If you spend a bit more time than just before breakfast, then you can also implement arguments which allow like concatenation and function evaluation based on CBOR packed. So I think this shows that the document is A, in a shape where it can be well implemented, and B, overall not too complex. Please have a look. Other things that are CBOR related that happened during the hackathon were that Martine has been working on DNS CBOR stuff, but she'll talk about that during her presentation. Lawrence, I see you in the queue.
Yes. Has anybody done packed CBOR in kind of a more of a language like C? One of the reasons I'm asking is that I basically work in C, and I've run across a lot of things that are really easy to do in like Ruby and Python, like for example, big numbers and 65-bit integers that you get really, it's very different when you work in C, and CBOR is supposed to be about embedded.
So I had this on my plan for the hackathon, but didn't get to it. I have like a rough implementation plan, but that's not something to really act on. So to my knowledge, so far there is no constraint implementation, but that's definitely something we should have before we take this, before we kind of conclude our input. Yeah, kind of. Maria?
Maria, developer of BERT, we are actually going to implement most of the CBOR inside BERT. So just please ping me to my email outside the list, because I don't have time reading the list, but I am able to implement lots of the CBOR thingies just in several weeks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Martin?
Just a note on C implementations. There is a extension for Nano CBOR by a colleague of mine, Mikolai, who is a co-author on the pack draft. So yeah, there is a C, but also only for shared items at the moment. But yeah, the C implementation exists.
That's good to hear. Thank you all. Oh, one.
So in my mail this morning, I forgot to say implementation complexity 0. The C and CBOR implementation that I did as a proof of concept in 2013 probably needs about 2 or 3 lines of code to do shared.
Would be good to see that. Okay. That being said, real change. Time for EDN literals. Carsten, do you want to kind of control things from your phone, or do you want to have a? I can give you the clicker, yes. It's plugged into my computer. Just don't press any buttons until I have your slides loaded.
Sure. I'm fully aware of that.
So, floor is yours.
So somebody needs to tell these people that they shouldn't be entangling them.
Someone today in core recommended to me that I just take the microphone and.
Yeah, and now, well, okay, maybe it's loose. No. Okay. Good. So this is going to be my standard introduction slide for the future. So we have several agenda items that are floating around CBOR. And I have this slide to just remind people that we are working on CBOR itself, like CBOR Pact and the things like deterministic encoding and so on. But we also have these two associated languages, EDN and CDDL. So we just had a CDDL update that's in the auth 48 stage now. Yeah, so we will talk about EDN mostly. So this is just a reminder. This is CBOR diagnostic or EDN piece. And this is a pretty hex dump, which we also use a lot. But it's really just a hex dump with comments. So that's also a useful way to talk about CBOR, in particular for people who haven't done much work with CBOR yet. Okay, so I'm going to talk about EDN. We already talked about CBOR Pact quickly. EDN, then we have over there on the CBOR side, the deterministic encoding. We are not going to have modules, and we will have DNS CBOR at the end. And I think it's easier to understand what we are doing if you sort it into this columns. Okay, diagnostic notation. CBOR is binary. The argument against binary is that you cannot read it. And so we need a way to read it. And EDN is the standard way that we propose to use in documents and in tools. So this is built as a superset of JSON. That's not the best way to do it, but that's the way the largest number of people can work with it. So I personally would have used YAML as a basis, but JSON is a little bit more in use. And we have the extensions that are needed to cover all of CBOR. We have binary byte strings, we have tags, and we have generalized map keys. So that's the three big extensions. And then we have a number of usability extensions that I'm not going to talk about because they are not relevant for the discussion today. But the important thing about tags is the only way to actually talk about them is by giving verbatim the representation. And that's not always what you want. So if you introduce a new tag, you might as well want to have a diagnostic notation form that is actually more appropriate for this tag than the representation in basic CBOR data items. So why did it put this screen up in a way that I mainly see the ceiling lights? That's not so good. Okay, so what is the status of the EDN document that we are talking about? This started out as a draft just for adding an extension point to EDN, application-oriented literals. So those new tags could define a way to describe their data as literals in the diagnostic notation. And that was pretty much done 18 months ago. But then somebody proposed to add ABNF, which is just a small matter of programming. So it was done in July last year. So that's the -01 document. And then we did the usual Brownian motion and finally requested publication after working class call and so on in May. So that's the official status we are at. However, at about the time, a lot of directorate reviews and so on came in, and they kind of asked for not having another data document based on the data document that is changing the original standard, but to roll up the text of 8949, 8610, and the new stuff. So this was a major editorial project that only completed 2 days ago. And now we have the literals 13 document. And if you ask me, we are done, but you are not asking me. So I'm going to say a few more things. The big question we have is the notation for strings. So of course, JSON kind of binds our hands for how we actually notate text strings. And we decided to have one text string based notation for byte strings, where we just use single quotes instead of double quotes, and the sequence of bytes that we would have as UTF-8 text then is the contents of the binary string, of the byte string. So that's that was pretty obvious. And well, yeah, there are various escapes there that you need to honor to make this happen. So if you need a double quote in a text string or a single quote in a byte string, you have to escape it. And if you need to stay in ASCII in your representation, then you need something like \U2318 to address a specific character. So I think that's all easy and well understood. Now, the interesting part is that already in 2013, we put in something that allows you to simply use a hex dump or a base 64 dump of the bytes you want to have. And we do this by writing the hex dump or the base 64 dump in single quotes with a prefix. So we have prefixed literals, and the original ones were H, B32, and B64. Nobody needed B32 yet. Maybe that will come, but it's kind of not implemented. So we still have H and B64. And what's a bit unusual here is that we have white space and a common syntax for those literals. And that's why the hex dump you saw a few slides ago actually can go right into EDN as it is. So that's unusual, and that's the first place where people were kind of leaving their comfort zone when looking at this, but it has turned out to be quite useful in documents. So it's not so useful for tool output, but it's very useful for writing it by hand into a document. So these prefix strings are also the syntactic place where we add the extension point. So instead of just supporting H for base 16 and B64 for base 64, we simply allow other prefixes, and these are the ones that then have the application semantics. So for instance, this DT with the RFC39 time string is a notation for the integer number 1 billion and something. And similarly, the IP single quote decimal IP address is a notation for the byte string C0 and so on. So that's a, well, neat way to put them in. We didn't really have to change the syntax very much. So we were quite happy with that. And I also think that there is not really that much contention about that. So to get an application-oriented literal, you just go ahead and register your own prefix. I have two examples on the next two slides. And this defines the prefix name and its semantics. And semantics is whatever is in the single quotes is actually processed by this prefix to create the data item that this application-oriented literal stands for. Yeah, and the idea, of course, was to handle all the prefix strings in the same way to minimize implementation effort. And here's one example, the E application-oriented literal, which we use to access CDDL information from an EDN file, which is really useful for writing specifications while you are still trying to figure out what the code point for this ELG here will be. If you do it the old-fashioned way, then you have to write something, and that something is probably wrong. And by saying, look in the CDDL, we can make this robust to changes in the allocation of those numbers. Okay, and the other example is no, I didn't have that example. Rohan.
I just wanted to make a clarification for something that's not necessarily obvious. So the single quoted strings by default are become B strings or binary strings, but some of the prefixes can turn into things that are not binary strings.
Yes.
So for example, the date and
Yes.
and some of the E options can turn into integers, or you could theoretically have it turn into any CBOR type. So just wanted people to be aware of that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so it's a notation. The byte string semantics just apply to naked, unprefixed single quoted strings, and to H and B64. And again, we could define new application-oriented literals for B32 if we wanted to, or B85, whatever. But other extensions can essentially return the data item that they are interested in. And here's another example, the CRI extension, application-oriented extension, is used by the core href document. So when you write a URI in a CRI prefixed string, that is translated into how this URI is represented as CRI, and that's quite close to the CoAP representation as well. Okay, so that's the idea. And the problem maybe is that when you define an extension point, you want to have examples for how this extension point will be used. And all these examples kind of live from ASCII strings in the incoming text content, which is actually not true, because CRIs work with IRIs and not URIs, so there might actually be some UTF-8, some non-ASCII UTF-8 in these strings, and that would be a normal thing to do. Okay, so I think that's all agreed. Now where it becomes interesting is how do we put this into ABNF? And the ABNF, of course, is new. So the older documents did not provide ABNF, just English language. And so we created new ABNF for EDN literals in the middle of last year. And the idea is to have the same ABNF for all single quoted strings, both prefixed and unprefixed. I think I only have the prefixed part here on this slide, but basically the idea is that you have a prefix and you have a single quoted string, and a single quoted string is a quote, 0 or more single quoted things, which are characters, and another single quote. And the single quoted characters can be unescaped characters, they can be a double quote. Yeah, maybe that wouldn't have been necessary, but that's what we decided to do. A backslash and a quote, and a backslash and an escapable. So that's pretty simple, pretty obvious. But of course, that means that when you define one of these prefixed strings, one of these extensions for the extension point, you also have to say how to work with the content of this single quoted string. And in some cases, that's pretty simple because, for instance, for IRIs, there is a document that tells you how to do that. And everybody knows that we are not always actually using that document, but we are also using the WhatWG living standard. The important thing for the CRI application is that it's kind of the thing that people are using in this place. But of course, we can provide ABNF because 3987 and 3986 provide ABNF, and with a little bit of tweaking, that actually can be used very well in this context. So we have essentially this. This is the syntax for the IRIs that can go into CIs. And you know, the IRIs are a superset of UIs. And this also allows deployment facilitization. Like, for instance, a parser could simply handle an unknown prefix by putting a tag 999 with certain contents that make the whatever was in the EDN file available to further processing. And that's not just a joke. It actually is a quite normal situation that you use some library functions, and those library functions may be at a revision that is not going to change for one reason or the other. So your application code actually has to handle whatever that library doesn't quite do right. So the application code will see the 999 and know what to do with that. That's of course not what you want to do, but sometimes it's what you have to do. Okay, so that was the state of the document. Now, the question we were discussing is, couldn't each extension actually define the content of that text string that is inside the single quotes by ABNF that goes right into the base ABNF of the EDN specification. So the obvious problem is that when you do that, you have to work on doing your own string parsing and escaping whenever you define such an extension. So the simple add string CRI equals IRI reference no longer works. You actually have to dive into that. And of course, it also means that the base ABNF actually changes each time you are adopting a new application extension. And yeah, it's not that easy to make sure that you don't make mistakes when doing that. And those mistakes are hard to get rid of. So yeah, I wasn't particularly happy about that. Should this be going forward?
Please try again.
Thank you. Okay, so the discussion was the working group document uses the pluggable architecture to describe its own ABNF. That's of course just a way of presenting the document. But of course, if you do it this way, then for instance, it's a natural thing that in a hex string, you might in the middle write something like \U0061, and that's actually a lowercase a, which is permissible in hex string. So this may be surprising, but it's not only surprising, it actually requires more code from implementations that use this single layer approach. Maybe, yeah. Okay, we had a lot of discussion on the mailing list. So what essentially came out of the hackathon discussion on the weekend was we could provide a tool that actually translates ABNF for the content of the single quoted string into ABNF for the single quoted string. And here, this is just, I haven't written this tool. I have the right pieces to write it from, but it's probably an implementation complexity 2 effort to do this one afternoon to actually generate this. So this is essentially part of the hex string syntax, where it says it can be a digit or a case insensitive A, B, C, D, E, or F. And when the tool has done its work, it will have new productions, and these productions include ways to say what these things would be in Unicode escaped form. And it's not complete. There's only so much space on a slide, but it's pretty much what you need to do. And yeah, so you get beautiful things like that, but I mean, it's just a way to get the ABNF into the single layer tool. So that's what I'm actually proposing. Let me quickly come up with 2 additional tweaks that I don't want to have. One would to change the content de-escaping rules for prefix strings. So one thing that when you just look at this example here is interesting is that all this garbage here needs to be created for ASCII characters, and we could, for instance, simply disallow \u002\u007f in the prefix strings. We certainly wouldn't want to disallow them in the unprefix strings, at least not in the text string case, because that's JSON. So JSON is going to bombard you with these things. So that simplifies this code. So it only has to deal with things like single quotes and backslashes, which don't occur in text strings except in comments. So it's easier, but it's not that much easier. You still have to do the mechanical translation. So I would be against giving up the symmetry here. Another potential tweak is just taking the H and B64 as special cases and say within those things, certain escapes are not allowed, but they are allowed in all other prefixed strings. So you could still do the CRI stuff with full escaping and so on. Yeah, I think the amount of work that is required to do H and B64 is limited. So having this weird asymmetry here is not really worth it, but it's a potential tweak we could do. So my proposal is to stick with an untweaked common syntax for string literals, and I hope that the current version -13, I think, actually now describes it in a reasonable way. That was another problem, that we found that the textual description wasn't good enough. We ship the existing ABNF with the EDN specification, because we have been working on that for a little bit more than a year now. And we provide a tool to translate that base ABNF combined with any number of ABNF snippets given into ABNF for a single level ABNF parser. That's my proposal.
One?
Do you have something about comments in single quoted strings? Do you have any? Do you have anything in a future slide, or should I ask about that now?
I haven't written that tool. I'm too lazy to write this by myself. I write tools. I don't write examples.
So I guess my question is, so the way I have not had time to read this since it was submitted 2 days ago. Does the BNF that you wrote, does it allow arbitrary comments inside of future prefixed single quoted strings?
The comment syntax, unfortunately, needs to be specific to the prefix. So for instance, B64 strings cannot have / delimited comments.
Yes.
So the comment syntax always comes with the ABNF for the plugin.
Or we could simply disallow comments inside of future app strings. Single quoted.
That doesn't even mean anything, what you just said, because whatever the future brings may not have a definition for the word comment.
Well, we could simply say that it does not have / delimited comments or end of line comments in the same style as are in the previous version of the document were permitted for H and B64.
We could, but why would we want to restrict those?
So
that, for example, code coloring would work in the presence of, if there were comments in the presence of of a new app string, it wouldn't know what to do with them, and it would display something different than what would be intended.
I think I can help you with the chair head off. Those like if there are any of comments of that style, those are comments of that language. So if, for example, we so I mean C comments are slightly different. So say we have some reason to have C++ in there, and then there might be comments delimited by slashes, but those comments are like parts of the C++ syntax. So they are not something that the single quoted strings don't make them comments. This is just something that the inner language does, and the hex language that we have in there just happens to use the same style.
You misunderstand me. So EDN says that certain sequences of characters are comments and are equivalent to a single instance of white space. That happens inside of H string in an earlier version of this document and inside of B64. If that behavior is supposed to exist in to be defined app strings, I want to know if that functionality still exists in future app strings. If so, I have a problem with that. If not, great. And if it's just that whatever you put in there, the thing that takes that, it's going to receive it and it's going to parse it using its own rules, I'm totally fine with that. But if something is supposed to turn some sequence of characters in the middle into a single white space, and then your editor is supposed to figure out whether this has where the quote ends, then that's a problem for me. Thanks.
Yeah. So for example, neither IP nor DT, the two extensions that are defined in the document, allow comments at all. Yeah, but that's up to the person who writes that future XYZ.
Sorry. Does a future XYZ expect that the EDN processor will turn that into a comment? Or there are no EDN comments inside of future app strings? A or B?
I don't know what an EDN comment is. So a comment in the base syntax of the language happens outside these strings. So the base comment syntax of EDN, which has both the slashes and the hash new line, those happen outside of strings. So comments within strings are part of the content syntax of that string. So if you want to start a comment in the hex dump, you could do that with a \u002 something instead of a semicolon, which is stupid, but you can do it. But if I define something new, I get to decide whether I want that comment syntax or not. And for IP and DT, we decided these are too simple. And I think CRIs also don't have comments.
Can't even.
Well, it would be hard to add a comment syntax to UIs.
Or steal responsible AD, but no hat for this part. I think I understand what you're saying here. I just want to make sure I've gotten it. Like when you define a new extension, like the DT example that you were just talking about, you could say, hey, DT supports a comment syntax. This is how you do comments inside of this extension, where you could say it's not allowed, right? That's what you're saying. Yeah. So in the future, which is what we're talking about, like we're worried about extensions in the future and comments in them. In this case, every new extension, you'll have to consider whether how commenting will work for that extension on a case-by-case basis. And when you define that extension, hopefully you define it clearly enough so that everyone implements comments consistently in that extension, so that a syntax highlighter can handle syntax highlighting consistently in that extension. So if I introduce a TypeScript extension today, and I want my code highlighter to detect that the TypeScript code is embedded inside of EDN, And to do TypeScript syntax highlighting, it would be like the Markdown syntax highlighting we're kind of used to feeling in Markdown. Am I kind of in the same ballpark, or is that just like I'm not the right analogy to think?
Yeah, if we want to put TypeScript into EDN, then we probably would include the whole syntax of TypeScript, and that would include comments, and we're fine. But TypeScript's comments, not EDN's comments. We just happen to make the comment syntax inside of H look a lot like all of EDN's comment syntax, and the comment syntax inside of B64 to look like half of the comment syntax.
So I would need to cut the queue here. But Rohan, is there something that you'd like to add, or are you is that an explanation that goes in the direction that you can work with?
I think it was as clear as mud, but I don't think that we're going to make any further progress here in front of a bunch of other people who probably are.
I think we have at least the material that we can use to continue this discussion offline. And with that, is there anything that, Carsten, you would like to add here? Because otherwise I'll hand it over to Lawrence.
Please read -13 and send comments, but the other kind of comments.
Thank you. So Lawrence, you're up next. I'm opening up those slides. Do you want to have slide control yourself?
I think you can. I think there's only 2 slides really, so I think you can. I'll leave it up to you.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
All right. So here we are. Go to the slide with the graph, please. That one. Yes. Thank you. So what I'm trying to show here is different kind of serialization options in CBOR. So there's, the bottom line represents all the serialization options. So indefinite lengths, non-preferred encoding of integers and whatnot. The second bar from the bottom there represents preferred serialization. We were also looking at calling, we found a flaw in preferred, so we're looking at basic or an update to it. But for the sake of this discussion, we can just assume that it is what we know as preferred serialization that we've known for many years. And then common deterministic encoding on the top there. And then I have a very thin line for DCBOR. So I've shown these things proportionately to what I think is the use cases. So to me, this may be subjective, but to me, the vast majority of the use cases, need a preferred serialization because it gives interoperation. I mean, if a sender and a receiver have both implemented preferred serialization, it's going to interoperate. Another thing I'd like to comment on this is that something that took me a long time to understand was the difference between serialization and variation in the serialization versus variation in the data model. So serialization just means variation in serialization just means you encode the data model in different ways. You sort of map or you don't sort of map. You pack an integer of small value into 1 byte rather than having leading zeros. So that's serialization, and it doesn't affect the data model. So this graph is a little inaccurate in that it kind of implies DCBOR is a serialization. It's kind of is and kind of isn't. It does require CDE, so it's serialization in that case, but the exclusions and reductions, it adds, particularly the reductions of floating point numbers to integers. That's a modification to the data model. So this is the way I understand serialization versus data model, and it seems an important thing to me. And for a long time I was not clear about that, and I was less supportive of CDE. You know, when I came to understand that, I was like, okay, we've got to have a deterministic encoding, deterministic encoding that covers the entire data model. You know, and then there's the data models is augmented with tags, but you know, for this discussion here, we don't have to go into that. So the use cases for CDE to me are actually fairly small. It's not really that necessary. You need it when you construct the data independently on both ends, but the data is not transmitted, and you need the data to be deterministic. If you're just signing data that you're actually sending, you don't need the determinism. I mean, you can, you know, the body of the of a Concise sign doesn't have to be deterministically encoded. Okay, Karsten?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the CDE document itself is short on information about use cases and usage. There's a separate document, the deterministic encoding explainer, that you probably want to look at for what the use cases are. And probably the most important use case I have for deterministic encoding is not getting signature inputs, but getting test cases produce deterministic outputs so I can compare them. So you mentioned the way JSON and all this stuff is handled different by Python and other languages. And that's something that deterministic encoding just nicely solves for you. But it doesn't help you if the application decides to encode things in a different way. So one example for this spike you have up there is RFC 8392, the COT, the CBOR web token document, which tells you that you cannot use tag 1 on your dates. You always have to use the naked integer. So that's really just one of these rules that we have been writing down all the time. We just didn't call them that way.
But that's a data model rule, not a serialization rule, right?
Absolutely. So it's in the top half of your picture. So
Yeah.
on top of the CDE block, we are only doing data model things. And
Right.
from CDE
Okay.
below, we are doing serialization things.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think there's you know, some common understanding about the difference between serialization and data model, so the profiles was previously profiles in the CDE document, and now ALDR, application level deterministic representation, I think, rules. So the way they're depicted in that document is they only apply to CDE. They don't apply to the whole of all the other serialization options. So it seems, my point here is that those rules should either be, we either eliminate those rules or we broaden it to all of CBOR. The case I have for eliminating those rules is that there's no history or a profile or rule schemes proposals. I mean, you know, we haven't seen eCBOR and FCBOR proposals in the 13 years since RFC 7049. There's really been nothing going on here that I, as far as I can see. I mean, I've been fairly involved for many of these years, and I haven't seen too much. I'm going to finish my slide here, and before I run out of time here, Karsten, and then we'll go to that. So, one of the things for me also is that as an implementer, I feel like I have to read everything or risk mistakes. So less to read is a lot better. That's actually a pretty significant thing. So my favor is to eliminate all of this, and basically in the 13 years since RFC 7049, really the only use case we've seen for any kind of profile or rule set in this case has been DCBOR. The other option here is to broaden them. So rename them to application level representation rules, so they apply to even to preferred serialization or just open-ended serialization. So we could broaden them to that, and that seems like that would be. Why would you restrict this sort of thing just to CDE? I don't understand why you would do that. I mean, the reductions and eliminations to the data model could be done for any kind of serialization. I mean, DCBOR happens to play it out that way, but I don't see any reason to reduce this to limit the exclusion and reductions to just CDE. I mean, then so maybe we should broaden it. Use cases arise, and I guess the last thing I'd like to say is that if we add this, I'd like to see some other people expressing support for it. At this point, it feels like myself and Anders are opposed to it, and Karsten is in favor of it, and that's really the only people that have kind of weighed in on it. Okay, thank you.
Carsten?
Yeah, okay. It's going to be a while before we have 13 years since 7049, but a lot of things have happened in this space that didn't bubble into the CBOR working group. So for instance, the FIDO CTAP2 document contains some words which are really hard to understand. In effect, they did the right thing, but it's not easy to find out. And the problem was that the ground on which they were standing was shaky, section 4.2 of RFC 7049. And that section needs to keep some flexibility open for the applications. And the nice thing about this DCBOR work was that it helped us understand that we can live with a common deterministic encoding, which is CDE, plus application layer rules on top of that. And taking the application layer rules out of that picture is just doesn't make sense. People need that. And on the right side of the slide, yes, there are application level representation rules. So every CDDL schema we write are application level representation rules. So this appendix of the CDE document really is about the case where you write rules specifically to influence the serialization, which you sometimes do. But of course, there can be other rules, but I don't think we need a new term for that. The whole point is pointing out that if you need something like DCBOR, we have a place in the architecture where you can put this.
I'm afraid I'll have to cut the discussion short here a bit. Is that something where is that a position where you both can like continue from there offline? Because I think
we have had this discussion about 48 times, and Lawrence doesn't see those cases that I have seen where it was
is the broadening approach something that you could see this following? Just kind of
so yeah, I have to, yeah. Part of the problem here is that CTAP is an individual protocol. It's not a class of protocols like DCBOR. So this all is about a class of protocols, not about individual protocols.
No. Please tell me where in the text it says that it's for a class of protocols.
Okay.
When it was profiles, it was.
Yes, then we changed that.
Yeah, I'll have to ask you to take this offline because we have one more presentation coming up, and I think we can afford like going a few minutes over time, but I've stretched this to the point where so you should just like control that. Thanks, Lawrence and Carsten, and I hope we can kind of come to more conclusion in some way.
Yeah, and I tried to make it a little bit faster than I planned, so you don't miss board game night. I talk about DNS CBOR, what it says on the title. I guess the motivation you all know. We want to get DNS messages smaller, and we do this with CBOR. And our objectives are that we are using CBOR for that and omit a lot of fields when we can. The new thing here is that we also provide, in addition to CBOR Pact, on-the-fly name compression similar to what you see in RC 1035, so the DNS draft.
Sorry.
This is one of the additions. This also resulted in some dedicated, more structured IData tabs. And the rest is basically things that we discussed in past meetings. So for example, that you can carry more than one question. There erased the need for an answer section in queries because there are known answers in MDNS for queries. And also then that client can say, hey, I can't store the question. Can you please send me the question back when you answer me? Then also, of course, I updated the comparison in to the classic DNS format in the appendix. And I made the EDNS option a map. I'm not sure if this should stay like this. The only reason I don't see it to be a map, because it's then not ordered. And the only problem that can make is with the name compression, but there are no names in EDNS options so far. So maybe this is a non-issue. Maybe I should go back to a list. I don't know actually. I just put it on there at the moment. So yeah, this goes over nicely into my hackathon results because I basically used this list in the hackathon to report on my results. When I gave the report, basically there were still a lot of tick marks missing. Those are now there as well because yesterday I had some time to implement the rest. So regarding implementation complexity, I would say of 1 weekend. So lessons learned were basically that the name definition needed some update with regards to CBOR Pact because it currently says that the name parsing ends when the element is either a text string or this tag to be done. But it needs basically just some mentioning that this is meant after unpacking CBOR Pact. Otherwise, I confuse myself. For the parameters, it showed that there might be some extension point needed, so I introduced one. I also introduced one for the options in case someone wants to extend those. I think you.
Sorry, I just had to chat with media.
Sorry. Basically, I wanted to go a little bit into name compression, but I think I skipped this. The important thing is that this name compression exists already in DNS, and that there is a 16-bit pointer for referencing names that came before in a DNS message. And I decided basically not to reinvent the wheel with that. So that is where this name compression that I'm using is coming from. And this looks basically a little bit like this in CBOR then. Let's skip through this. So we reference a suffix of a name with this tag, which we might need to decide on. And so you can also reference suffixes of names. The question I would like to ask to the working group is what should T be? So should it be a 1 byte tag or 2 byte tag? The advantage of a 1 byte tag would obviously, with a pointer together, it would be similar in size to DNS pointers. So we don't lose any compression rate. With a 1 byte tag, we enter a less crowded real estate in the YANA assigned numbers. So yeah, it's a decision we still need to make. Then, yeah, the structured stuff I skip. You can read the slides later in the data tracker if you want to. And some other optimization where I'm basically don't know which way to go is that instead of resource records, like you do in normal DNS messages, we could have the opportunity to just use resource record sets instead. So you only carry the TTL and the type and the class once, and then all the R data that is coming with it put in an array. That would be more concise. It would be easier to sign with DNSSEC, but if you just have one record, you would get 1 byte overhead, and I don't know. I rather don't want that. So yeah. And then I noticed that sometimes Punycode actually is shorter than UTF-8. So I put there in the Punycode can be able, but maybe that's also not a good idea. So what do you think is my question? And
Sorry. Yeah, pop-ups. This is too.
So, and the last thing is basically that what should the name media type, the content format for CBOR for co-op be? I proposed these numbers, but maybe something speaks against it. And yeah, then my question, last question to the working group is, should this be adopted by the working group, or should I rather go with that to DNSOP?
Thanks, Martin. I hope to stretch it for like a minute or so to get answers to these questions, because I'm sure in a room like this, we'll have some.
Yep. Just let me jump queue. I've got to run, but we should talk with the DNSOP chairs if you haven't already.
Yes.
And then I'll follow up offline, and thank you all for a successful CBOR meeting.
Thank you. So, and any answers to the room? Any questions on the topic?
Sorry, I forgot to press the hand. Carsten Bormann. Yeah, looking at this question, what kind of expertise do we need? And of course, we need expertise from both sides.
Yeah.
But I think the CBOR expertise is has more influence on the design of the thing. So I think in the end, we have the right people to look at this here. But we also have to have input from the DNS people, and the DNS directorate, of course, is the next step. And we have Chris here. Yeah.
Chris? Yeah.
Took me a second to get to the hand. Exactly what he said. The CBOR part is we are more likely to get DNS people to come here and provide a little bit of feedback on that, and designing this has more complicated, difficult CBOR questions than it has complicated, difficult DNSOP questions. Although I suspect it's actually not super complicated and difficult in any direction, and here is fine.
Okay, thank you. Carsten, one more question then?
Yeah, not about this. I'm just looking a last call requested on the more control document.
Awesome.
That's probably what Ori meant by successful.
There was.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think that this work, I mean, it's very CBOR related, so
Okay.
it looks like a natural place to be done here, but probably keep the DNSOP people in copy, right? And when you do your working group last call, also keep them in copy, just to like when the document gets adopted and all that, right?
Yeah, and I guess if you have any input on the other questions I raised, maybe you need to look at the slides again. Then just I'm somewhere in the hallways always, so just come by.
Just briefly taking my chair head off. Yes, I would also like to see this here, so and chat on. Yes, basically I'll confer with the other chairs, but sounds good.
Yeah, and regarding actual adoption of this, there might be another version at the end of the week, and that is the one maybe you want to then adopt. Okay.
Okay, thanks a lot.
And thank you.
I'll just leave this briefly up on slides, because we are now going to 5 minutes over time. This has been the plan as always. We'll keep with the interims and the cadence. Let's follow up on the items that we've discussed on the mailing list and with each other, because you're all kind of, many of you are around for the week. So let's keep this up. And yeah, any final comments from anyone? Because otherwise, I think we're. Carsten, you look surprised. Yes, please do. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening. I think that was good input here. So also goodbye to you remote. See you around. Will do.